Welcome to the Finance Garage podcast, your go-to podcast for navigating the world of finance. I'm Jonathan, your financial guide, bringing the latest market trends, investment strategies, and financial news that matters to you. And by the way, I'm also going to share my other passion, which is cars.
At the SWU Group, we help everyday families achieve financial success. Our integrated services include financial planning, accounting, credit advisory, and estate planning. We're here to guide and support you every step of the way, from custom investment strategies to maximizing tax efficiency. We ensure your financial goals are met with peace of mind. Visit simonwu.com.au for more information.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Finance Garage. As always, Jonathan Wu here, Senior Financial Advisor and Principal at the SWU Group. As we all know, we have the agent of change operating since January the 20th, being Donald Trump, and he has made very swift moves in two main areas. One around trade.
The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
As well as the other one being about DOGE, or the Department of Government Efficiency, which is headed by Elon Musk, at least now, in order to reduce the government's budget deficit and their ability to continue to operate on the path of their spending patterns.
I will create a government efficiency commission tasked with conducting a complete financial and performance audit of the entire federal government and making recommendations for drastic reform.
But today, I want to talk about what's on my mind around tariffs. And this comes off the back of this morning, the Trump administration has confirmed that Australia will not be exempt from the tariffs that they're enacting on us with regards to aluminium and steel exports to the United States. Now, we've heard a lot about tariffs recently. You hear them in the news, politicians talk about them, but I think that a lot of people don't actually understand how they work, especially because of the way Donald Trump has, I guess, prefaced it, contextualized it, and placed it in the minds of Americans, thinking that the American public will win, the US government will win vis-a-vis the revenue that will be raised from the tariffs. But the key question is, who actually really pays for them? The way that Donald Trump has sort of prefaced it is that a lot of people think that it means, in the case of Australian steel and aluminium exports, that Australia will be the one paying. But is that really true? In Australia, we have been exporting steel and aluminium to the US for years, and Trump's decision to impose tariffs means that Australian companies, yes, in reality, will have to charge a higher price to US buyers. But the way the ecosystem or the supply chain works with regards to tariffs is incredibly important to understand. Trump's claims cover the fact that tariffs make foreign countries like us pay, but it's not really how it works. And it does matter to the average Australian or the average person in any other country where Donald Trump's administration is enacting tariffs, because it doesn't only hurt big corporates. It hurts everyday workers, it hurts small businesses, and consumers feel the effects. So today I want to talk about this, and then what does it mean for you? If we go to the baseline of what is a tariff, the simple definition is that a tariff is basically a tax that a country places on imports from another country. So if you imagine that you're buying a car from Japan, but before it arrives in Australia, the government adds an extra fee. That fee is called a tariff. Now, there are two main reasons historically why governments have imposed tariffs. One is to protect local industries. So this, in effect, makes foreign goods more expensive, so people buy local products instead. So one good example, because obviously I'm quite familiar with it, is the car market. And we have something called luxury car tax in Australia. So previously, as many of you will remember, we used to manufacture Toyota Camrys in Australia. We used to manufacture Holden and Ford. And in order to protect those three main car makers, more specifically more Holden and Ford, the strategy was to tax foreign imports vis-a-vis luxury car tax. So cars that were over, or in today's terms, over about $70,000, have a tax, which is taxed on the consumer, making buying luxury cars, or effectively foreign imports, very expensive. The irony of it, though, is that we have not manufactured cars in Australia since about 2012 from memory, when Holden and Ford finally shut its factory doors. And that's quite interesting because if you think about it, we still have that tax, i.e. the luxury car tax, which is effectively a tariff, but a domestic tariff. But we no longer have a local car market to protect. So have a think about that. Obviously, the second reason to having tariffs is to raise government revenue, and the government collects this from the tariffs. So the way to analogize it is, imagine if you went to Woolies and Woolies started to charge everybody that walked through the front door a $2 fee, but only if you're buying products that were made overseas. So you, the consumer, would have to decide, do you pay extra or would you rather buy a local alternative? If you think about then who collects the money, in the case of the US, the government imposing the tariff does collect the money. But the way they collect the money is not via Australia. It is via the person who is standing at the port, let's say the Port of Los Angeles, that's importing, the importer of that steel or the importer of the aluminium. When they take possession of it, that is when they pay that invoice, that is the tariff. That's why it's very important that just because the US government is collecting the money, it doesn't mean Australia is the one who's actually paying. If we consider Trump's claim, right, during the election and now that he's been in power and every time he's announced tariffs, Trump's claim is three parts. One, tariffs make foreign countries pay. Two, we're stopping other countries from taking advantage of us. And three, it'll boost American manufacturing. Now, the reality is that foreign companies don't actually directly pay tariffs. As I said before, the US government doesn't send Australia a bill for everything that we export to the US in terms of steel and aluminium.
The United States' decision to impose tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium as part of a global decision are concerning.
Instead, American companies that buy Australian steel have to pay more because of that tariff. For example, a US car manufacturer that buys Australian aluminium will now pay more for that material when they import it. Now, the business, i.e. the car manufacturer in the US, is not stupid, right? The business will pass the cost on to consumers. When companies face higher costs, they either A, absorb the cost, which hurts their profits, or they increase the price for their customers. The reality means that everyday Americans end up paying more for goods that contain Australian steel or aluminium. If we then consider the second part of it that Trump claims, that by tariffing other countries that export things into the United States, it will help American manufacturing. Does it? Well, in theory, yes, if US companies switch to using American steel. In reality, many US manufacturers rely on cheaper imported steel to keep prices competitive and margins strong. The problem is if steel gets too expensive, they might reduce production. If you reduce production, it means you lay off workers. And then compounding that laying off workers problem is that you then move production to another country to avoid the tariff. If we consider an example of Trump's previous administration in 2016 to 2020, in 2018, Trump imposed steel tariffs on China. The result of which was that American manufacturers that use steel saw their costs skyrocket, and some companies ended up moving production to avoid tariffs altogether, which in reality actually hurt US jobs.
Ready to take the first step in investing, or just looking to continue growing your wealth without being inundated with financial information? With SWU Online Invest, we offer a range of expertly managed portfolios designed to match your investment needs. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just getting started, know that we will work tirelessly to ensure your investments are strategically positioned to maximize your goals. Visit swonlineinvest.com.au today.
So then the question is, who actually gets hurt in all of this? In the US, businesses that use steel and aluminium, they're going to get hurt, right? Because they are facing those high costs. So US car makers, construction firms, beverage companies that use aluminium cans, all of them will face high costs. Then the consumers are going to face the high cost domestically in the US because manufacturers raise prices to cover the tariff. So Americans will pay more for cars, soda cans, and even other appliances that use steel and aluminium. And if businesses have to cut costs because their margins are being impacted and they reduce production, they could lose their job. The impact to Australia is steel and aluminium companies lose US buyers, right? Because if US companies switch to other suppliers or reduce orders, Australian exporters lose business. We'll also see domestically job losses in key industries, because if the level of exports drop because the US importers are refusing to import Australian steel and aluminium because of that added cost, the demand for our export drops, meaning that our key industries also get hit. There is also the retaliation risk, right? If Australia were to respond with its own tariffs on US goods, it could spark a trade war which hurts both sides, which is what Canada and Mexico are now looking down the barrel of, as well as Europe. The reality also is that with regards to tariffs, we have effectively gone through the past 100 years before Trump took office in 2016 in his first term. We've gone through a very massive recalibration of the world and an increase in globalization, which has helped everybody, right? What Donald Trump did in 2016 to 2020 was effectively reverse almost 100 years worth of open markets, free trade agreements, and re-implement the traditional way of protectionism, which doesn't help the global economy long term. But as an election pitch, it has worked. If we look at historical examples of real-world impact of tariffs, the first example is we can look at the US-China trade war, and Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. China then retaliated by taxing US exports. US farmers were among the hardest hit because China stopped buying American soybeans, which crushed the farming industry. The US government, in defense of that, then had to spend billions domestically in subsidies to keep farmers afloat. If we then turn locally, we had a situation of Australian beef and wine with China, right? Our farmers, our winemakers lost out, just like steel producers will in this case. The third one is EU tariffs. When Trump introduced steel tariffs, the European Union responded by slapping tariffs on US goods like bourbon and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. This forced Harley-Davidson to move some production overseas. If you move it overseas, that's exactly the opposite of what Trump wanted, right? It reduces the manufacturing in the US, it reduces jobs, it reduces tax revenue. What has Trump actually won by doing it? So I hope everyone can sort of reflect on this short podcast with a final takeaway that Trump's tariffs aren't a simple tool that just makes another country pay. In reality, they're a hidden tax that hurts businesses and consumers in the country that imposes them. If Trump's tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium stay in place, they won't just hurt Australian businesses, they'll also hurt American manufacturers, and then the offset to that, or the collateral damage will become the US consumer. So next time any politician that you see on, the 7-second news grab says, we're gonna make another country pay, ask yourself, who's really footing the bill? Be very careful when you listen to economic policy and challenge political rhetoric, because if tariffs ever came up in Australia, understand what they really mean for our economy, because that is what matters. So as always, happy to take feedback. You can email me at jonathan.wu@simonwu.com.au. And of course, as always, please remember to listen to the disclaimer at the end, and look forward to everyone tuning in for the next one. Till then, see ya.
This podcast is not financial product advice and is intended to provide information only. It does not take into account the investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of any person. You should assess whether the information is appropriate for you and consider talking to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Any investment examples are for illustrative purposes only. The information is taken from sources which are believed to be accurate, but Simon Wu, Jonathan Wu, SWU Financial Planning, and Personal Financial Services Limited accept no liability of any kind to any person who relies on the information contained in the podcast. Unless expressly stated, none of the information should be taken as a recommendation. For more information, please visit www.simonwu.com.au.